All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. Don't you guys ever forget that. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. First up, let's get an announcement out of the way here. As a reminder, we'll have a guest on this morning, and we're actually going to have a guest on Thursday night. I'll have Karlin Borsenko on. We're going to talk about Antifa, the far left, and kind of try to cover as much as we can in a whole whopping hour. So look forward to that. That'll be exciting. Some people just can't make the 7:30 a.m. However, you know who can? This morning's guest, who is no stranger to controversy. Now, those who have followed me for some time, and you have seen some of my sharp criticism of some of his ideas on more than one occasion. Nonetheless, consider him a friend, and this is now his second appearance on the show. I want you to check out our Dad Talk conversation that we had back in episode 317, Dad Talk with Jeremy Kauffman. It was a great conversation. I actually enjoyed it, as I do with all the dads that come on my show. Today, however, we will be discussing a topic far less controversial, I think, and a but of more concern. Dare I say, you will see a different side of him than you might find unexpected if you only know him by his more controversial views. Tech censorship. Is it a thing? To what degree? And what can we do about it? Jeremy Kauffman joins me as someone from the tech space to discuss. So please welcome Jeremy to the show. Jeremy, how are you? You might have to hit the unmute button.
I did. Good morning, DL.
All right. Good morning to you. All right. Pardon me as I click buttons here and change things around and get it all correct. When I have guests on, the technology behind the scenes is a little bit different than when I do a stream by myself. So bear with me there, folks. But all right. So we're going to talk about tech censorship. Now, what alerted me to all of this is you posted a talk that you gave in 2021, correct? Is that right?
That's right. And I was at the center of this industry at the time, running Library and Odyssey. And one of my roles on social media seems to be remembering things. Actually, a lot of my viral posts and good posts are just like other people seem to forget what happened. And I'm like, well, I remember what happened. And I will cite something from the past and recall something from the past. And so, yeah, I have a very well cataloged memory of what happened in 2020 and just how bad the censorship was, around COVID. And I gave a talk at the beginning of 2021, sort of documenting it for the sake of posterity. And I reposted it the other day, which I think prompted this conversation. And I thought it held up. I think it holds up pretty well. And so we are, I think, to some extent out of that moment. Maybe we're now in slightly the other direction, but not nearly the degree to how bad it was in 2020.
Right. And we're going to get into some of the where we are now compared to where we were. You led that conversation with a book called Manufacturing Consent, the Political Economy of the Mass Media. Now, I've not read this book. Can you summarize that book, which seems to be the foundation for the rest of the talk? Can you summarize that book for people who haven't read it?
I haven't read it in a long time.
No, right? You said
I'm
that.
not, rather than summarizing that book specifically, because I'm not sure I would get it perfect. I think but one of the central themes, which I would compare to today, and I do in the talk, is right. It used to be that mass media was the way that sort of the national conversation, the sort of shaping of the national conversation took place. We had newspapers, radio, and television. And the extent that you could control or influence what those institutions were saying, you can shape the political conversation. Now, in our modern era, all of these are less important than social media. Social media, peer-to-peer media, without going through institutions, although we could, of course, consider the social media sites themselves institutions, but without going through some sort of media institution, this is where all the conversation takes place. The conversation is not shaped by CNN. It's not shaped by the New York Times. These institutions still have influence over the conversation, but they're not in control of it the way that they used to be. And so if the government wants to shape political conversation, they now have to put influence on social media companies.
Right. And we see like even government officials are very active on social media. Trump has been for quite some time. We see JD Vance now engages even with smaller accounts. I've seen him respond as we do with many other politicians. So I think Elon definitely got it right when he said like X is the public square, in a sense. Now, so that we're clear, you define censorship in that talk as, quote, the restriction of speech for political or ideological reasons, end quote. And you don't limit that necessarily to government, but you include private entities as well. So let me ask you, is there a danger at all in using the same term to describe this action, whether it's from government or, say, private entity? Because we believe, like, if I come to your house, you can say, DL, you are not to swear, right? Like, this is my private property. You can't swear. Strictly speaking, that would be censorship. But it's your private property. But that's much different than the government saying, hey, you can't say this. So is there a danger in using the same term?
I think there's not one, so long as we're speaking, clearly. I think the danger comes from, if you believe that your audience, believes what thinks of a word one way and you're thinking of it another. This is where I think you can some dishonesty can take. And I'm not saying you're doing this, but
Mhm.
someone. This is where some dishonesty can happen. I think as long as we're speaking clearly about what these things mean, I value free speech, not just that I don't want the government to be interfering with my speech, but I value free speech as a cultural norm. That is that we should all be willing to entertain and discuss ideas. Culturally, I'm not gonna go too hard on here. Like even the mild. We don't agree. The opening of the show, right? No one agrees with everyone on everything. People
Right.
seem to need to make sure that they say that they don't agree with me on some things. And often these are things. Not you. I know you're willing to talk about just about anything. These are often things that people don't even want to talk to me about. They don't want to have the exchange of ideas over certain subjects. And to me, culturally, I like the practice of, hey, we should let all ideas sort of be entertained. We should let them go up against each other, and let's let that marketplace of ideas. Let's let the best ideas sort of come to the top. And so I like that as a cultural principle. Of course, if someone is in your house, you might have rules about what they can say. But
Right.
these major websites, these social media websites, I want them to be, I, have as few rules as essentially necessary,
Mhm.
as legally necessary, right? Even I had this was an unpopular take, but I have no problem giving unpopular takes to my audience. I don't like Destiny being banned from Twitch, which I understand happened a couple of years ago, so that wasn't a Trump thing. And I understand he's a piece of shit. Sorry, I probably shouldn't swear. But
Okay.
like he you know, I would rather Twitch not be doing these things, and I would rather it be handled. I'm all for. I get how these things can influence the user experience, but I would rather there be, give me a little toggle that says, let me see the bad guys, and let me at least opt in to seeing these places. I don't like the idea. I want these places to be neutral pipes that allow peer-to-peer conversations. I want them
Mhm.
to have their thumb on the scale as little as possible. It's impossible to have no thumb on the scale because you got to have an algorithm. You got to have settings. There's no way to have no thumb on the scale. But to the extent that they can be, neutral and not taking sides, that's what I would like, from these places. So, yeah.
But I feel like they're not doing that already. So, for example, a lot of people on X have made the comment. They said it would be great if we had a filter button that could filter out by country, right? Like there's this big concern that like there's a lot of people from India that are being provocateurs or kind of trying to, using mass accounts that are driven by mass bots to kind of help shape conversation one way or another. And so I feel like you mentioned the algorithm, but I feel like the algorithm really isn't designed for me in any way, shape, or form because there are plenty of ideas that I have about shaping my experience, and they're just simply not available, nor are they being talked about. So, does the algorithm itself kind of represent some way of censorship, or am I just being silly?
Oh, it absolutely is. Well, I mean, again, well, okay. It Whether I want to use the word censorship specifically to describe it,
Mhm.
I'm going to waffle on that and think. It definitely does shape the political conversation, though. The algorithm is shaping the political conversation, and even on X, you can still have posts flagged for. They have these hateful or sensitivity type labels that get put on certain posts, even today, and that could even be a post that's doing well, that's viral, and once that label gets on there, that post is done. The distribution on that post is over.
Right.
And I've had that put on some posts that I would have stood by and said, this is a real, comment and a real point that I'm making. And it's X saying, hey, this isn't something that, we want discussed here. Effectively, once you're putting that label on it, you are saying we don't want this to be talked about here. And I would much rather have this be, user level stuff. Like, at least for my account, like, I don't, I want everything. I want everything to be allowed to be talked about. I want, I don't want the site to be deciding, hey, this post used an icky word, or whatever. I would prefer everything legal to be said, to be allowed to be said and distributed on these websites. And I get that my preference may be a little bit atypical here, but I would still like it. And a relevant one here is where this is the Trump administration. This is actually arguably the much worse than what happened with Kimmel. Is the Trump administration has forced the sale of TikTok to to American interests.
Yep.
And I can even defend that a little bit more than I can defend. My understanding is all of the people that it's been sold to are very much on the Zionist side of things, which is a side I actually think does merit some defense. But to be forcing the sale of people who are taking over TikTok specifically because they don't like the discussion of Israel related topics on the platform, and like, this is a huge part of why, as far as I can tell, this is a huge part of why this sale is happening. And I would argue that this is the most censorious act that has come out of the Trump administration, much more so than the FCC guys' comments about Kimmel, which I also wouldn't defend strongly, but I think we're like kind of blown up. Whereas I think this is actually a bigger deal, and not enough people are talking about this side, because the TikTok is a huge amount of people, younger people, are getting their opinions from TikTok, and so it's real, and it's about changing the algorithm. That's what this sale is about. It's about changing the TikTok algorithm. Because the United States government doesn't trust a foreign nation's influence, and then they're forcing it. The specific people who have ended up on the TikTok board, clearly are on have certain political perspectives. I believe it's Larry Ellison who is sort of ending up in substantial amount of control over there, and like, he's one of the largest boosters of Israel.
So when we look at the algorithm, we look at sales like this, can we really say that it's all that different from, say, 2020? Because it just feels like it's almost like the same thing, but playing out differently from my perspective. And it's playing out in a way where the right, if you will, who once were the ones on the receiving end back in 2020 primarily, they're now doing it, and they're now championing things. But like you said, there's kind of like this arguable way of defending it. But again, at the end, I'm very much a free speech absolutist in the same vein you are. I'm like, look, if it's not a direct threat, chances are I don't want it removed. Or at least if it is removed, or if there is a tag or something put on it, then it's very transparent, and it's very much about, okay, I'm a private entity. This is what I want, or what our users want, and there's a very clear line where this has nothing to do with government whatsoever, and we might even piss off the government. So can we say it's really all that different today?
I do think it's different. I think what was so one, and I'll revise if evidence comes out. But one, we now have basically every major social media company saying the government, the Biden administration, put explicit pressure on us to remove exact posts as well as exact categories of posts. And I don't think we've seen anything equivalent like that. I think the TikTok thing is the worst thing we've seen. but we haven't actually seen how that, and then we haven't actually seen how it plays out. We haven't seen how they've actually changed the algorithm yet, because all of this, just happened. But in 2020, just to maybe it's worth recalling some of this stuff. One of the first ones that got censored was the Bakersfield doctor video. So it was two licensed medical doctors in a California hospital giving their opinions as doctors. And this video was not allowed to be shared on YouTube. It got pulled down and it wasn't allowed to be shared. And this was not, look, and I think even the conspiratorial, nutty, schizo stuff should be allowed, to be clear. But this was two medical doctors giving opinions that were within the realm of consideration, and so we were in a situation where, and there were other doctors who got banned. We had Senate testimony. So there was testimony in the United States Senate that was also given by licensed medical doctors. And so this is supposed to be on the record, on the permanent record of the procedures of the United States government. This video was also not allowed on YouTube and Facebook. So there's nothing I've seen that rises to that level.
Right. So let me challenge that a little bit. Let me tell you, let me use it in a somewhat unrelated, I think it's a completely unrelated example. There was a movie, a documentary like 2015 on bullies. And in the video, one of the kids is this team is recording different kids being bullied across, in different parts of the United States. And in one scene, a kid is in the classroom. He had responded to a bully, and the teacher is asking him, she's like, hey, he's like, hey, you didn't do anything, she's like, why did you do it? And he's like, well, you didn't do anything when this kid was bullying me. And she's like, well, the last time you came in here, the kid had done this thing to you. Has he done that again? And he's like, and he kind of sulks down and he whimpers and he's like, well, no, but they did other things. And so I feel like what is actually happening is, yeah, we're maybe not getting the administration, and we're only one administration away anyway, but we're not getting the administration necessarily using the same bully tactics that we saw during COVID. But we did see the FCC come in and use soft power, I would argue. And it feels to me like nobody's really been punished for it. So maybe we've kind of started down the path of normalizing the idea of silencing people. So maybe the government has retracted some, but does that mean it will stay retracted? And how do we, and if it is, how do we keep it? So I'm kind of pushing back and asking a question, I guess, kind of at the same time.
Yeah, no, well, so this is a big part of the problem, and I don't know how you fix it, because you can't play by rules that your opponent is not going to play by, right? And so my impression is we have the choices between left authoritarianism or right authoritarianism. I consider myself a right-wing person, and so if those are the only two choices, then I'll choose right authoritarianism. Right? I would prefer right libertarianism. That would be my ideal outcome. I'm a libertarian. But if the only choices on the menu are left authoritarianism or right authoritarianism, then I'm going to order right authoritarianism because that's clearly preferable from my perspective to left authoritarian. You don't have to agree, but that's my choice. And so, again, Facebook, X, YouTube, all of these places have said that the Biden administration did these things. I don't believe there's been any apology. I don't believe there's been any expression of remorse, even insincere ones. Okay, so and if Kamala Harris had been elected president, I believe all this stuff would still be happening. I believe they would be putting pressure on social media companies too. And so I'm not saying that. Therefore, I wish the FCC chair hadn't said that. I think they hurt their own cause and actually rallied more people to Kimmel by saying that. And I don't think it's something that the FCC chair should be saying. So I'm not defending it. But there is no other option. There's not an option on. There's no feasible political movement that is saying, let's stop this altogether. There's no one who is going to be elected in 2028 who is proposing, let's stop this altogether. That's just not an option on the table. And so, and I'm not even trying to lead you to a conclusion. I don't know what you do. Obviously, my answer is you move to New Hampshire. Of course, that's my solution for everything.
For sure.
But I don't know. There's not. We're not. It doesn't seem like we can want to go back. Like you and I can want to go back and say, hey, let's go back to the internet of the early 2000s or the late 1990s or whatever. And but that this just isn't on the table. There's no one proposing this.
And it's interesting. I've heard the argument of left wing versus right wing authoritarianism, and I tend to think of myself as more right wing, like I'm more aligned, not necessarily political policy wise, but just in terms of some of the ideas and stuff like that. I tend to be more aligned with the right, and so I kind of understand the idea of like, well, if there's only two choices, then you pick whichever team you're most aligned with. However, I have this nagging feeling that we haven't really left left-wing authoritarianism, actually. And here's my argument. I want you to tell me hopefully I'm wrong. Maybe you can identify it. So I said a moment ago that I feel like we're normalizing this idea of silencing people. So in 2020, you had the government that was literally pressuring, all these social media outlets. You had, and here's one that you might have missed, and maybe just didn't get to it in your talk. I remember because you mentioned Donald Trump being removed from Twitter, but I also remember that MSNBC on Rachel Maddow's show, she came out and she said, hey, look, the president lies a lot, so we're just not going to air his stuff when he's talking unless and she basically said this, I'm not quoting her exactly, but she's like, unless he says something that we think is important for you to know, we're not going to air it. Now, I appreciate her honesty there, but here's where I think we're still living under left-wing authoritarianism is we just saw this move from the right to cancel nobodies on TikTok for saying vile things about Charlie Kirk, and then Jimmy Kimmel as well. So it just feels like if you want to look at it from a left-wing perspective and say they were tyrannizing people by silencing them, well, if the right is now doing it, aren't we basically still under the left-wing tyranny of silencing people then?
So my standard here is maybe a little bit odd. I don't to me, I want social media to be like as neutral, like pipe like as possible. So I find the removal of accounts, the closing of accounts on any platform to be like, I'm very against that. Mm-hmm. On other types of canceling, someone losing a job or something, I think I'm not. I think this is actually much more defensible because there are lots of jobs out there. This is much more closer to and I get that the social media companies are also private companies. Mm-hmm. But to me, losing a job or these types of cancellations, it's a much smaller thing. There's millions of places you can go and work. Whereas there's 3 social media companies or there's 5 or whatever. There's not that many, and so you can't you really are losing a lot of ability to talk to other people when you're getting removed or purged. I am watching the TikTok situation. Maybe there are things that have happened that I'm not up to speed with. I will also admit, in 2020, I was following this stuff obsessively. It was essentially part of my job too, as well. Mm-hmm. Now I'm only following this stuff semi-obsessively because I'm that kind of person, but I'm definitely not doing it to the same degree. So maybe there are instances that are happening. My understanding that's all that's happened with TikTok so far is that that the board has essentially been replaced, and that Larry Ellison is the guy who is effectively going to be in charge with auditing and retraining the algorithm, and that this actually hasn't happened yet. But mm-hmm. I might be misunderstanding the timeline and what's happened.
Gotcha. And don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say like one-to-one comparisons here necessarily. I'm just saying I'm not sure that we've necessarily left it. So for instance, in your video, you mentioned definitions that have changed. Those definitions haven't come back. Right. And I realize we can't go back to everything. This is not me saying, man, I wish we could just go back to the 1950s when things were so great. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm just saying we never seem to roll things back ever in anything. And so I'm is it leaving, or are we just changing our view of what it looks like and then saying, yep, it's different. It's a little bit better now.
Yeah. Well, this is, I think the sort of modern democracy, democratic systems that we're living under, this is an unprecedented way of humans organizing
Mhm.
themselves. It's new. Like
Right.
to live in a state of 330, 350 million people, and to be managing the entire thing by essentially universal democracy. And what we're seeing is, um, this is like Orrin McIntyre's idea of like the total state. You know, everything is becoming, political. The
Mhm.
government, more and more things are up for a vote every 4 years. More and more aspects of our life, and now these divides are are creeping into our private lives and all these other aspects of our life. And the country does seem like it's increasingly sort of dividing into roughly two teams, and it does seem like it's getting more and more serious, and there's more and more animosity between each other. Now, I don't think we're about to erupt in some sort of hot civil war or anything like that. I think this is a slow motion catastrophe rather than something that is about to break in some horrible way. But it doesn't seem like partisanship and the amount of divide has, like, it's only gotten worse my entire life, and more and more things are now sucked into this. I mean, like, right, it's a it used to be the taboo, you wouldn't want your son or daughter to marry. It was like ethnic taboos or religious taboos. Now it's political. Right now, it's
Right.
Democrats and Republicans don't want their children like that. We don't care what race they are, but they better not be a damn Democrat,
Right.
and so we're seeing this become this increasingly large divide, and I don't know how it gets unwound. This is a little bit uncharted territory, I think, historically.
So you said at the end of your video that you were optimistic about the future. Do you still feel that way? Because that was 2021. This is 2025. You still feel that way?
One of the blessings or curses that I have is I'm kind of wired to be an optimist. Like,
Mhm.
even when bad things happen to me, I just am, like, my natural state is optimistic, and I really am optimistic about human ingenuity, human creativity, the types of things that humans build and create and do. And I believe I believe the humans will get through this. I believe we will conquer Mars and the solar system. Like, I think I think there will be, a trillion humans across the universe one day, and we just have to go through some growing pains here as we've we've spanned the entire Earth. We don't have frontiers anymore for people to exit or go and build new things. And
Mhm.
now we're kind of going through some reconfigurations. We're learning some lessons. I think there may, again, I'm not saying bad things won't happen, but
Mhm.
I do think on the other side of it, like, good things will be there. And we are still, again, to me, one of the best things. I'm very pro innovation. To me, it market economies and all of the things that market economies enable are why we're able to have this conversation. All the technology involved, it's millions of people, the cumulative efforts of millions of people that allow this conversation to take place,
Right.
right? And to me, that is humanity at its best, and that's largely driven by markets. And
Mhm.
we still have those market pressures are still the good ones. They're still there, and I think, so I do think a lot of the good stuff will continue to happen. But yeah, this we are in this weird. Um, there might be some turmoil at some times, at least some soft turmoil. The most peaceful way we get out of it, in my opinion, is, and of course, this is like one of my beats, is that we're assorting ourselves, and so people will people will move to Florida or New Hampshire or Wyoming or Tennessee or whatever, and similarly, like, we have these news articles coming out every 2 weeks in New Hampshire about some progressive family decides to leave the state because they don't like the political climate here, and so this is the way we get out of it, in my opinion, with sort of the least bad things happening. Is if people can recognize that we have these irreconcilable differences, we can go live around people with whom we don't share the same amount of differences, and hopefully that would allow more people to get what they want. So to me, that's the most optimistic scenario. This is also, I will say, why I think some of the censorship on the right can backfire when you're enforcing a preference through sort of cultural hegemony, like through not like literal force, but like you're making it clear that these taboo things can't be said. You create this situation where there are people who disagree with you and they're quiet about it. And
Hmm.
they're just waiting for an opportunity, to turn the tables, right?
Right.
Like we have there are all these people working at tech companies in San Francisco, and around America, who were in this position under the sort of left,
Right.
hegemony. And as soon as they had the opportunity, they seized it. And so, this is, I do think the downside is like, you would rather know, I would rather know, that my neighbor or my coworker have certain opinions, than be creating a situation in which they're just looking for an opportunity, to flip things, around. Because when you're enforcing a sort of artificial preference, I think you no longer you're no longer getting like truth. You're no longer able to tell what people actually think because you're enforcing it in this artificial way. So I guess that's the whole point there. Yeah.
Gotcha. No, and it's interesting because I almost feel like I'm on the fence with that, with my own question to you about being optimistic. So on one hand, I'm like, this is, like you said, this is a fabulous thing that little old me, with putting a few $1,000s in, can have like a nice little setup and invite people to have conversations about all kind of stuff, right? And there's like lots of access to information. However, I feel like despite the fact that there's so much access to information, people are being either very selective about it, or they're not they're not looking at the information objectively. They're more looking for like, okay, how can this benefit my team, my idea, the confirmation bias situation. And then when you throw in the mix of, like what I'm seeing on the right where people are getting canceled, I'm like, I feel like my son is going to grow up in a world where you could easily get fired for something you say. Now, on the flip side, to be optimistic about it, and maybe you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, or if you think I'm right or wrong, maybe right now it looks bad, but maybe in a more normalized world, it would also be normalized for somebody to get another job somewhere else. Again, if we're kind of fracturing into, okay, well, I got fired from this company because these values aren't shared, but we've clearly defined lines of shared values. So now it's a little bit, maybe it's easier to find work. Maybe my son says something, kind of controversial or seemingly controversial, but there would be some company that says, yeah, that's not really controversial to us. That's kind of normal. Come on board. Is that maybe what I'm missing, or what's not being felt right now?
Yeah, I do think the latter is happening, more and more. And certainly if that's the way I would be doing my, hiring. Like I don't, to me, I find certain progressive positions to be like so crazy that, and I'm not saying I wouldn't talk to them. I would have that, dialogue.
Mhm.
But like you're saying, I mean, and I've tried having this, in fact, with some of the left libertarians who don't like me, and it's kind of like the words don't even enter their head, or they don't understand the arguments I'm even making. Like it's one thing to disagree, of course. I'm not saying my arguments are so powerful that once you hear them, you should just believe them. But like I've had these experiences where it's like you're not even understanding the argument, right?
Right.
You're not even perceiving the argument that I'm making, And what you were saying about, yeah, look, I don't think that many people are really truth seeking. I think a lot of the algorithm that a lot of people are running is how can I confirm or advance my agenda, and they go out looking for the facts that let them
Mhm.
do that. They follow the people that let them do that. I clearly have. I've had this thing happen to me on social media a number of times, where people are like, Jeremy, can you say something about this? Can you go get this guy or whatever? And it's like clearly for them, like
Mhm.
my arguments are soldiers, and they like my arguments, and they weren't curious about like whether what this guy was saying was true or not. They're just like, go get him, go,
Right.
go tell this guy off, and um, and I'm not above doing that. I'm not trying to claim that sometimes arguments are soldiers or whatever, but the yeah, a lot of people aren't truth seeking, and this gets into this idea. There was also in that talk that I gave, which I got from this guy Martin Gurry, about how like social media is this just it's a very disruptive force. It's a new type of communication. It's a new way. People didn't have this opportunity before. You couldn't, if you had some 5% view, you couldn't immerse yourself in a 5% community and have your 5% view echoed to you from from all corners. You would be getting the views of the mainstream from your television, from your newspaper, from whatever. And now, like I don't watch TV. I don't read the newspaper. Like it's even for me. And I do try to at least have some Substacks and stuff to get different perspectives. But everyone is more and more in in these bubbles, and they're not truth seeking their way out of them. They're seeking more confirmation of the bubble that they're in.
Right. And it's weird because it's almost like a positive and a negative from my perspective at the same time. So on one hand, like say we're both libertarians. Libertarians isn't exactly the most popular view in the United States. So the fact that we could get online and kind of congregate together and have discussions and maybe flesh out our ideas and maybe even have some arguments about over, who's the best libertarian, the real libertarian, whatever, all those things in some sense are a good thing. But on the other hand, I feel like, one of the things that I remember growing up is if you had some crazy idea, let's just, like you had to contend with people in real life around you who might not have that idea. And so in some ways it would temper it, right? Because you were challenged and you couldn't just, grind, put yourself deeper and deeper into that position. Whereas now, if I have some crazy position, I can get online, I can find anybody that believes it. It doesn't seem to have any end to what that belief might even be, like just anything,
Right.
and
Yep.
flat earthers, we didn't go to the moon, whatever, like you can find your community and put yourself in there deeper. So it's just kind of weird. And maybe you are right. Maybe this is kind of like how um, any new change, dramatic change in society happens is it's rough at first and then levels out.
Yeah.
Is that
I mean, that
going
would
on?
be my that would definitely be my hopefully that happens. Yeah. And so not only does that everything you're saying was spot on, and then also you get into these communities, right? And they were whatever it is, they reward you for being the most that way possible, right? Like once if you're in the, I mean, let's use a libertarian once we're in some libertarian communities here together, right? Like that those communities, you succeed. You often succeed in the community by being the best. I'm the most libertarian. I'm so more libertarian than you are, man. Like you have no idea. Like, oh, you would grab a flagpole to save your life. You're not a real libertarian. Like, as I would let go because that's even more libertarian, And it's like this is what these communities encourage people, to do, and I to the extent I don't really see many people doing this. Like maybe Vivek a little bit, although I don't. It's always a question of if he's acting. Like where is the what do we all agree on? Whether it's libertarians or Americans, what do these things mean? Where's the shared values that we're retreating to, where we can say, well, we disagree on X and Y, but at least we still agree on Z, W, and Z. And there's none of this. Instead, it's further entrenchment, further encouragement to the trenches. There's who's under 40 and liked by most Americans at this point. Like everyone's on a side. We don't have the only figures I think you can find who are like broadly popular and everyone's like, oh yeah, I like that guy's on my side. They're all like 70 years old,
Right.
and so yeah, I don't. It's definitely weird, and to the extent that there are people who are I don't even know who's out there trying to end this, and if they are, it
Right.
doesn't seem like they're succeeding.
Do you see
Maybe
a
it's you.
future?
You're going to be the grand unifier, DL. You're going to
I don't know about that,
bring everyone back together.
but that's an interesting comment. Do you foresee a future where, we've kind of fractured, socially, and we're in our camps, whatever those camps may be. Maybe they're political camps, maybe they're ideological, maybe they're religious, whatever. And then, do you foresee people rising up and becoming popular who can kind of traverse different camps? Because I know for myself, literally, I'll tweet one moment some sharp criticism of the right, and then maybe even in the next moment tweet some sharp praise, and it might even be the same person, right? I've done this repeatedly, but there doesn't seem to be a marketplace for that right now. Do you foresee that maybe in the future?
So I do think if there is some sort of self-sorting, then it does get easier to cooperate
Mm-hmm.
again. Like, our a lot of our political instincts, like politics was life or death evolutionarily, for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
or at least it could be. If your tribe turned on you, or whatever. And I think there are a number of practices that we have, even things like how we care for each other when we're sick or when bad things happen to us, that are actually affirmations of political bonds. Not like political, like Democrat, Republican, but like intra tribal
Mm-hmm.
affirmations. And uh, and so this makes a lot of these conflicts, like, are tapping into these parts of our brains or our psychology that make them feel existential or very important. And if we can get to places where that's not true,
Mm-hmm.
like, I find it's much easier to cooperate with someone if their bad beliefs or their wrong beliefs, of course, from my frame,
Mm-hmm.
aren't impacting me. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that that person's beliefs are also impacting me that I think makes them be more, threatening. So I do think there's hopefully more space. Like, I don't, and that would be the downside of the sorting. Like, we don't, if we sort ourselves into, multiple tribes in various, regions and places in America, like, the result of that, the goal of that would be peace, not, not then war between the groups. And that certainly, I guess, would be a concern if you go in this direction, right? You want it to be, well, we have different preferences and we can respect our different preferences if we're not, in a mutually overlapping, territory. Whereas if the way that we get to different camps is both sides believing the other side is some inconsolable evil, that would maybe then not actually end things, and is how how you would continue to have conflicts. But my sort of, to the extent that there's a hippie still within me, which there is a little bit of, it would be that we can recognize our differences. And that can be the space for Christian nationalism, and this can be the space for left libertarianism, and this can be the space for right libertarianism, and this can be the space for progressivism, and this can be the open borders paradise. This can be your closed borders. Like, that would be, to me, that's the best conceivable outcome. If people aren't changing their minds, if people aren't being persuaded, then that to me is the best possible outcome that you could
Okay.
get.
So let me ask you this, and this will kind of play on some of the just general things that you've said over time. One of the concerns that people have, when we're doing our, I guess you can call it our self sorting, when we're kind of getting into groups, is that, like you mentioned, we're kind of portraying the other teams, tribes, what have you, as having, differences that are not reconcilable, and to some degree, a threat to us, an existential threat, right? And so is the charged language that's happening, where the rhetoric, where it's really, now, mind you, I am not condemning rhetoric unless it's an actual threat. I'm like, free speech is free speech, and that's better than the alternative. But if we're kind of amping ourselves up and we're making more provocative commentary, especially on other groups, is that leading to the more irreconcilable differences, if you will? And then could that possibly exacerbate the violence that we see among the different groups? because like a lot of people have pointed out, there is a faction of the far radical left. They look at it, they say these things are simply a threat to our existence. Well, when it's a threat to your existence, you got to do something about it, and that's usually violence. So are we kind of setting ourselves up by this uncontrolled, and I know that you've had some provocative posts out there that some people might interpret as like that's an existential threat to me. Are we kind of contributing to our own demise in a sense with this?
Yeah, yes and no. It depends. I mean, I would, again, my hope is that, because I probably have contributed to some of this, and but my hope is that we recognize that the differences are irreconcilable and we go our separate ways. Like that's the peaceful resolution here, or the most people. Now, is there going to be an? It probably doesn't happen with like literal no conflict, but hopefully it's a minimal amount of conflict, right, and not some kind of like full on conflict. I'm not. I want to be very clear. Like I do not like it at all when any kind of civilian person is being there's violence against them for their political views that they're expressing with speech, and that would apply to Charlie Kirk or whoever would be the exact opposite side of him. I don't know, like Hassan Piker or something, sure. And so like using violence against those people is bad, but to the extent that we see people on the left like Hassan, kind of winking and saying, hey, this is good or it's acceptable, like I would like that the awareness of that to be amplified so that people can be aware, like there really are probably something like tens of millions of we can call them the far left, I don't know, Americans who are, if not actively, like they're okay with it. They're okay with Charlie Kirk getting assassinated. That's tens of millions of people. What do you want to do with that fact? And this is where, to tie back to the speech thing, this is where I'm saying, it's like, if you make those people shut up, you don't know who they are, right? And I'd rather know who they are. Same with the same argument for like taboo views about race or ethnicity. Like, wouldn't you rather know who's a racist than than make it that you're not allowed to say this or that? And so but it's real. Like it is real that these people really do feel that way. Like that's not some tiny incident that's being blown up to present a fake state of the situation. Like we have survey data, we can see the audience of some of these people, we can see and so it is a real phenomenon that there are a lot of people whose views are so different from one another that they're at least tolerant of violence towards the the opposite side.
Gotcha. Yeah, because that's my big concern, and I think we mentioned this earlier, is that what I would like to see is, even if we all go our separate ways, which I guess I'd be okay with, and we all kind of like create our own little communities, at least the one, maybe we retain, just a small binding association of, hey, killing people for words is unacceptable regardless of community, with, I guess, the exception of maybe some very far radicals on either the left or the right. But then the other communities kind of eschew those communities and say, hey, if you're one of those, don't come here with that nonsense. But I just don't feel like that's happening. I feel like, we're just kind of driving the bus faster, if you will.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is what's happening. And I will say, I'm not coming on your show to encourage, quote, political violence or anything.
Sure.
But I do think it is kind of an incoherent concept. Like, as someone who is, trying to be logical and consistent with my beliefs, like this is all, like, I think it's a far different thing to shoot at a politician, and I'm not encouraging it here, but I think it's a far different category of act to target politicians than it is to target private citizens, because the politicians aren't just speaking, right? They're actually acting. They're actually controlling the lives of 350 million people, and that is like the 4th of July and Independence Day was, quote, political violence. And when people talk about how, the Second Amendment, if the British had the Second Amendment, their speech wouldn't be getting censored. And it's like, well, how? Like, how
Right.
would the guns? How? It's like there clearly is. There's this inconsistency here where people are saying, I condemn all political violence, and they're also, oh well, at least the Second Amendment protects our rights. It's like, well, if you're saying the Second Amendment protects our rights, you are to some degree saying guns protect our rights because they will kill people or threaten to kill people,
Right.
who take certain political acts. And so as someone who tries to keep things consistent, there's an inconsistency, there. I don't think, again, I would much rather us sort ourselves out peacefully than get into a civil war where we're assassinating politicians. So that I'm not here cheering that on. But I do think like that is part of it. I mean, that is if a politician or a leader is being sufficiently tyrannical, like that was supposed to be. I mean, at least that's my understanding that that's supposed to be part of the reason that citizens have firearms. It's supposed to be that the government can never get too tyrannical because citizens would use their firearms to defend their liberties and to defend their freedom. That's,
Right.
And so we have to, at the same time, like be able to say that. Charlie Kirk, that doesn't justify shooting, Charlie Kirk, obviously. So,
Right. No, I agree because I've said it on the show before. I'm like, look, the Second Amendment wasn't about hunting deer. It really wasn't about protecting yourself from a robber breaking in at 2 a.m. in the morning. However, that's part of it. The primary purpose of it was to prevent a tyrannical government. But what I also temper that with and point out is that the framers in their great wisdom gave us this system that allowed so many avenues to avoid having to get to that point. So it's like, so I look at it like, yeah, the Second Amendment is there for that. However, that is an absolute last resort. And even though I'm kind of dismayed at what I see, I still don't see that we're anywhere near needing to exercise the Second Amendment as it was intended. We have so many options. We're just not exercising them, but we have them and they still are there. Like if, like below me, not, in district is Randy Fine, who I would love if they would throw out. Yeah, I think he's a terrible congressman, but there's no need for violence whatsoever. We have plenty of options. We could, the election's coming up. We can just vote somebody else in, So, so I agree with you on that. All right. Let me get to a comment or two here, and then we will give you your final words there. So let's see. So this is kind of off topic, but apparently let's see here. So it says, seems like Kauffman likes labels, left, right, libertarians. How do you feel about caucuses within the LP and the caucus war? And then that Liberty Lady points out, just to be clear, I want to abolish political parties and caucuses. So what's your perspective there? Because that's kind of like a microcosm of what we've been talking about.
yeah. So that is, I'm going to guess, although I'm not sure, that I probably would label you as a left libertarian. Not necessarily, though. I could learn more about you. Because this is it's not the way things work. These left right, they're real. The left right, and it's only the left wing people, in my experience, who want to deny among libertarians that left right is this real thing that divides people. A lot of the people who have a problem with Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, or me, and want to call me not a real libertarian or whatever, like they all have this psychology that's oriented towards universalism, and there not being differences between people. And in my view, these differences really do exist, and and they really are real. The best way out of this, in my opinion, would be not to attempt to deny these differences, but to accept them and embrace them. We have these differences, so like let certain states be right-wing libertarian states, other states can be more left-leaning libertarian states. And so that if you want peace within the LP, it requires acknowledging differences and letting differences exist in different places.
Mm-hmm.
The push that there's only one true way of being a libertarian, and this desire for some sort of like kumbaya existence, in my opinion, is is the sort of, we can call it the unconstrained vision from Sowell if you don't like calling it leftist, but it's along an important psychological continuum.
So it's funny. By the way, I'll just point out that Liberty lady, tongue tied. That Liberty lady is definitely not left leaning, but
It's not, so I'm using left differently here. It's not. I'm not saying you're a socialist. Okay,
okay.
You could be perfectly libertarian. It's about how universalist versus localist you are. It's about how your ethical concerns are oriented. How much ethical weight do you give people far away from you compared to your neighbors, your friends, your family? It's the heat map meme. These are real differences. Okay, even if the heat map meme gets a little bit misinterpreted, it captures an absolute real difference between people's psychology, and it's that difference in psychology is completely outside what we think the role of government is. Okay, so someone can have far different ethical concerns, far different ethical orientation than me, and we can both agree that we want to make the state as small as possible and that relationships should be as consensual as possible and all of these things that libertarians would believe in, and we can still have differences in this other area, and this is a real and it has to be acknowledged or talked about in some way.
Fair enough. I guess for me, I look at it. So I'm here in Florida. You're in New Hampshire. And I've been asked by people, they're like, what about that New Hampshire tweet? I'm like, what about it? I'm like, they're their own breed up there. And that's it. Like, I don't care. Like, at the end of the day. Now, I mean, I do care somewhat because I don't want to say, let me rephrase that. I don't care to the extent that others care, because at the end of the day, I'm still here in Florida enjoying the nice sunny weather, beaches, all these cool things that New Hampshire doesn't have. Just want to point that out. Although I will give you guys credit, you guys have some nice mountains up there, which I would love to cycle. Beside the point. But I ultimately I just look at it and say, yeah, they're there. I'm here, and
Yeah.
and I'll argue I'll debate about it because that's what I do. But at the end of the day, I just kind of don't care, and I feel like the problem that we really have is, and tell me where this squares with the left-right paradigm, is that a lot of people care more than they need to about other things. So how square that away in this left-right paradigm that you have?
Well, I'm gonna respond to it slightly differently. So there's a quote from Rene Girard, who I love, and it's, the victims most interesting to us are always those who allow us to condemn our neighbors, and our neighbors do the same. And so it's like, why do humans do this? Why do we behave this way, right? And it's because it's about a mimetic conflict or an intra-group status competition, and so that's what motivates all of this, behavior. And if you want to have a successful culture, a successful group, if a group is to have a successful culture, let me put it that way, you have to cut this out root and branch, and you have to have it that inside of our group, status is obtained by achieving victories against the outgroup. Okay, mm-hmm. We don't do intra-group status jockeying competitions. That's not what our group does. And so you have to have a group identity itself that attempts to taboo and push out this kind of behavior, because effectively it's people saying, I don't like the internal status rankings of this community, right? Mm-hmm. Like, these people there's a sense in which they have the resentment that New Hampshire is, popular, and they feel that it's undeserved. They feel that it's false in some way, and that it needs to be torn down, and we need to show the world, that it's, that it's false. But this is actually, this psychology is very common, right? All of the, look at like the most, it's Freud, who I mostly don't like, has an adjacent or similar concept here called like the narcissism of small differences, which is that, again, the most vicious ethnic conflicts are like, when they're just a little bit apart. It's not, you don't generally see people having a lot of visceral hate towards some people around the world that they've never met and don't have to deal with. The hate, the most visceral hate is towards our neighbors that are slightly different. And so this is a common thing in human organizations, in human sociology, and we see it, in the LP as well.
Okay, fair enough. All right. So, final words from you. We're about at the end of the show here. So, final words on this whole topic. Make us all feel good about the direction that social media is going. Even though, and I'll point this out, YouTube came out and they were like, all right, we're going to start bringing back some channels. And then they were like, except for you, except for you, except for you. And they were like, and then they got it, then they made it convoluted, right? Because then they were like, well, the reason we banned them is because this other rule and because we've got this pilot program. And I'm like, just make people whole, but make me feel good despite all these things happening about the future, that my son's going to grow up in a world that's not psycho.
Well, make people whole and say sorry. Well, look, I think social media is mostly good.
Mm-hmm.
I will plug my account briefly. So I have over 200,000 followers on X, and that's just from like pulling out my phone and typing into a box and finding all these people who find what I have to say interesting, and we can discover each other and we can interact online and we can share ideas. I mean, this is unprecedented. It has to be better than the alternative of like having one local newspaper in your town and it taking days for information to get across the country. Like, this has to be better. It might come with growing pains. It might come with uncomfortable transitions, but it has to be better. Like, how could it not be better at the end of the day? And so I do think that, as I said, that some of this stuff isn't going to slow down. And so, yes, if you're a libertarian living in California or New York, you better be checking out places like New Hampshire and Florida and other places. Who knows how this is going to play out? I think it's obviously not going to be all in one place. But yes, I think this sorting stuff is good. I think it's healthier psychologically to live around people who share your values. It's part of why I'm comfortable being such a loudmouth online, is I know I have groups of friends and peers here who are similar enough to me that I'm not going to get canceled by them, and I'm not going to suffer consequences for speaking my mind. And so I think it's also healthier psychologically. So that's my take. So, and if you like this, if you like what I have to say, give me a follow on X or whatever, and visit New Hampshire.
All right, awesome. Well, I appreciate you being on, especially this early in the morning, to talk about deep philosophical, sociological topics, because what better thing to do at 7:30 in the morning?
Indeed.
So I'm going to put you backstage. If you need to go, that's fine. If not, we can chit chat after. But once again, thank you, sir. All right, folks. So you heard him. Hopefully this conversation was enlightening to you. Hopefully you found it, at least in some way, making you feel better about the things that we see on social media. I know that when I log on, sometimes I'm all like, oh my God, the internet was a mistake. It was so bad. And then other days I get on and I'm like, this is so cool. Right. So it's like I can't make up my mind, but hopefully he's correct. We are simply going through the growing pains of having this type of connectedness, this type of access to information. And hopefully the end result is, ends up being something very positive. With that, I'm going to go ahead and end the show. Remember, you can support the show. You can go, and I didn't get them in the show notes. I apologize, but I will add them right after. But you can go to my link tree. You can find me on all my different platforms. You can also go to my Patreon. You can go to my Buy Me a Coffee, and you can help support the show, because, as you know, there are things that need to happen behind the scenes, and your help helps me produce an even better show, which, again, the goal here, not to just be the most objective libertarian, but to have the best libertarian show out there. So with your help, I can accomplish that. And with that, folks, I'm going to head on out, and I will see you tomorrow. Remember, tomorrow morning, there was a question in the chat about, hey, are you doing a show in the morning and then in the evening? Yes, I am. I will be doing a show tomorrow morning, and I'll be doing one tomorrow evening. And then I will be back Friday morning to have yet another show. So look forward to all of that. Going to have a bonus episode this week. So another reason to go and support me. Go to find that link tree. With that being said, folks, I will see you guys tomorrow.